A drunk tourist thought he could defile America's most sacred ground by urinating on a tomb guard. He chose the wrong soldier to mess with. The kick he received was a lesson in respect he'd never forget. The air at Arlington National Cemetery carries a weight that settles on your shoulders the moment you step onto its hallowed ground. It's a silence of reverence, a quiet so profound it feels like a physical presence, broken only by the whisper of the wind through ancient oak trees and the distant, mournful notes of taps. At the heart of this sanctuary, before the stark white marble of the tomb of the unknown soldier, Sergeant Ethan Hayes stood as a living monument to that silence. At 30 years old, Ethan was a combat veteran, his service in the desolate mountains of Afghanistan having carved a discipline into him that was as unyielding as the granite beneath his feet. Now, as a sentinel of the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, the Old Guard, his mission was different but no less critical. His deep blue Army service uniform was flawless, the wool pressed to a razor's edge, each brass button a miniature sun reflecting the solemn sky. His white gloves were pristine, his M14 rifle held at a perfect, unwavering angle against his shoulder. His movements were an intricate, unchangeable ritual. 21 steps south across the black mat. Turn and face east for 21 seconds. Turn and face north for 21 seconds. 21 steps north. Click. The sound of his steel-tipped heels striking the marble was the only percussion in this silent symphony of remembrance. Each step, each second, a tribute to the unknown soldiers who lay beneath, a promise from a grateful nation that they are never forgotten. That promise was shattered by the sound of a drunken laugh, coarse and loud, that ripped through the sacred quiet like a tear in a priceless painting. Whoa, check this place out. It's like, super serious, bro. Chad Miller stumbled into view, a stark contrast to the solemnity surrounding him. He wore a stained football jersey, baggy cargo shorts, and a backwards baseball cap. He reeked of cheap vodka and the cloying, chemical sweetness of a half-drunken energy drink he clutched in his hand. His eyes, bloodshot and unfocused, scanned the scene not with reverence, but with the arrogant amusement of someone looking for his next source of entertainment. A few dozen visitors were scattered around the plaza, their conversations hushed, their gazes fixed on the tomb. As Chad's boisterous voice echoed off the marble, heads turned. A young mother instinctively pulled her son closer. An elderly couple frowned in disapproval. But Chad was oblivious, his attention captured by the single, stoic figure in the center of it all. He staggered forward, his sloppy footsteps a gross parody of Ethan's measured pace. Yo! Look at this dude. All dressed up like he's going to the world's most boring party. Sergeant Hayes did not flinch. His gaze remained locked on the horizon, his jaw set. His training was to be a symbol, impassive and eternal. He was trained to ignore distractions, from crying babies to sudden thunderstorms. He was about to find out if that training covered a threat like Chad. The initial shock among the onlookers quickly curdled into a palpable tension. Chad, fueled by liquid courage and a profound lack of self-awareness, saw Ethan's stillness not as discipline, but as a challenge. He was a bull, and the silent, blue-clad soldier was the matador's cape. Not much of a talker, are ya, pal? Chad slurred, closing the distance. He began to circle Ethan, his worn-out sneakers scuffing loudly on the pristine walkway. What's the deal? Did they, forget to wind you up this morning? Or are you just one of them fancy toy soldiers? Near the edge of the plaza stood a woman in her late 40s, her posture radiating a quiet, steely grace. Pinned to her black blazer was a small, gold star, a symbol only those who have paid the ultimate price of service would recognize. She was a Gold Star mother, and she watched Chad's display with a look of profound pain, as if each jeering word was a fresh wound. Not far from her stood a man in his 60s, ramrod straight, with the unmistakable bearing of a career military officer. His silver hair was cut short, his jaw tight. He was a retired Marine colonel, visiting the tomb as he did every year on the anniversary of a battle that had claimed 3 of his men. His eyes, which had seen real conflict, narrowed, tracking Chad with a cold, analytical fury. Chad, ignorant of the silent judgments being passed, escalated his mockery. He began to mimic Ethan's march, his steps a clumsy, exaggerated parody. Left, right, left, oh, whoops, he laughed, stumbling over his own feet. Man, this is harder than it looks. You must get, like, super tired. Don't you ever just wanna, chill? Maybe crack a beer? He lurched closer, invading Ethan's personal space. The sour stench of his breath washed over the stoic guard. Come on, man, just a little smile. A wave? Something. I'm a taxpayer. My money pays for this whole show. He gestured vaguely at the tomb, the amphitheater, the endless rows of white headstones beyond. The colonel's hands, resting at his sides, slowly clenched into fists. He had commanded men like Ethan, brave, disciplined soldiers who understood honor. To see that honor so casually defiled by this drunken fool was an almost physical insult. The Gold Star mother put a gentle hand on her heart, her eyes never leaving the impassive sentinel. She had given her son to this country, and this guard, in his silent, tireless vigil, was the living embodiment of the nation's promise to honor that sacrifice. Chad wasn't just mocking a soldier, he was dancing on the grave of her child. Chad leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. I bet it's all for show. I bet that rifle's a fake. Just plastic, right? Like everything else around here. He reached a hand out, his grimy fingers aiming for the polished wood of the M14. Sergeant Hayes's peripheral vision, honed by years of scanning for threats in hostile territory, registered the approaching hand. His training screamed at him to maintain his bearing, but every instinct, every fiber of his being, coiled like a compressed spring. The rifle was not a prop. It was a fully functional M14, a symbol of a soldier's burden, and he was its guardian. Just as Chad's fingers were about to touch the weapon, he seemed to think better of it, or perhaps his drunken brain simply fixated on a new target. He snickered, pulling his hand back. Nah, too easy, he mumbled. Instead, he took another swig of his energy drink, then made a grand, theatrical gesture of stumbling forward. Whoops! The red, sticky liquid flew from the can in a wide arc. It wasn't a splash, it was a deluge. A large, ugly splatter of crimson soaked into the perfect, deep blue wool of Sergeant Hayes's tunic, right over his heart. It dripped down his pristine white belt, leaving a trail like a grotesque, sugary wound. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. It was sharp, horrified. The desecration was no longer verbal, it was physical. The line had been crossed. The Gold Star mother flinched as if she had been struck herself, her hand flying to her mouth. The colonel took a half-step forward, his self-control straining at its absolute limit. He was no longer an observer, he was a witness to an act of profound disrespect that, in his world, demanded an immediate and decisive response. Ethan did not move. Not an inch. But beneath the stoic exterior, a cold, calm switch had been flipped. He had endured far worse than this. He had worn uniforms stained with mud, sweat, and the blood of his brothers. But this was different. This was not the grit of combat. This was a deliberate act of defilement, a stain not just on his uniform, but on the very symbol he embodied. The tomb of the unknown soldier was a church, and Chad had just spat on the altar. Chad, however, saw only victory. He had gotten a reaction, not from the guard, but from the crowd, and it delighted him. He straightened up, a malicious grin spreading across his face. Oh, man. My bad. Seriously, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Guess you'll have to get that dry cleaned. Do they even let you guys take those costumes off? Or do you, sleep standing up? He laughed, a high-pitched, grating sound that echoed across the plaza. He had succeeded in leaving his mark. He had no idea that the real mark was about to be left on him. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with the unspoken rage of the onlookers and the coiled, silent potential of the man in the desecrated uniform. The silence that followed Chad's laughter was heavier and more menacing than before. He had thrown his best punch and the guard hadn't even blinked. For a sober mind, this would have been a clear signal to retreat. For Chad's alcohol-soaked brain, it was an infuriating puzzle that demanded a more extreme solution. If mocking him didn't work, if defiling his uniform didn't work, he would have to commit an act so vile, so unthinkable, that it would force a response. He swayed on his feet, his gaze dropping from Ethan's stained tunic down to his own belt buckle. A grotesque idea began to form behind his bloodshot eyes. Still nothing, huh? Chad's voice turned ugly, all pretense of humor gone, replaced by a raw, belligerent spite. You think you're better than everyone, standing there like a damn statue. Well, you know what? Even statues get pissed on by pigeons. The onlookers watched, a sense of dread washing over them. This was escalating beyond a drunken prank into something truly profane. The colonel's hand went instinctively to his side, where a service pistol would have once been. He recognized the look in Chad's eyes, the point where a situation turns from bad to dangerous. You know what this place needs? Chad announced to the silent plaza, his voice slurring badly. A little personal touch. My own little tribute to the fallen heroes. His hands fumbled with the buckle of his belt. The metallic clink was unnaturally loud in the dead quiet. The meaning of his gesture was horribly, sickeningly clear. The Gold Star mother saw it. She gasped, a sound of pure disgust, and immediately turned, grabbing her son's shoulders and physically steering him away, her body shielding his eyes from the sacrilege about to unfold. We're leaving, honey. Right now. Time to water the garden, Chad slurred, a triumphant, ugly sneer on his face. He undid his pants, his drunken determination overriding any last shred of decency. He positioned himself directly in front of Sergeant Hayes, taking aim at the guard's immaculately polished black leather shoes that took hours of meticulous work to bring to a mirror-like shine. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. The tourists, the colonel, even the gentle breeze, everything stopped, suspended in a shared moment of horrified disbelief. This was not happening. Not here. Not at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Ethan remained motionless, but a change had occurred that only a trained eye could see. His eyes, still fixed forward, had lost their ceremonial softness and taken on the hard, sharp focus of a predator. His weight shifted, almost imperceptibly, to his back foot. It wasn't a retreat, it was a preparation. His entire body had become a weapon system, calculating range, trajectory, and necessary force. He was no longer just a sentinel. He was a soldier defending his post from an enemy incursion. Since you're so good at standing still, soldier boy, Chad grunted, his act of desecration beginning. Let's see how you handle this. The first drops of liquid spattered against the gleaming black leather, instantly marring its perfect surface. The ultimate insult had been delivered. The sacred ground was being defiled, and the promise of honor was being broken. The instant the warm, foul stream struck the polished leather of his shoe, Sergeant Ethan Hayes' training and instinct converged into a single, decisive point. For 1,728 seconds of his 30-minute guard tour, he was a symbol of restraint. In the 1,729th second, he became a symbol of consequence. What happened next was not a brawl. It was not a fight. It was a single, fluid equation of motion, executed with a speed and precision that defied belief. It was so fast, so clean, that many in the crowd would later question if they had truly seen it at all. Ethan's right leg, the one his weight had been coiled upon, snapped forward and up in a perfect, brutal arc. There was no wasted movement, no theatrical wind-up. It was pure, distilled military efficiency. His gleaming black boot, the very object of desecration, became the instrument of judgment. The impact was shockingly loud. A wet, solid thwack that echoed across the marble plaza. The boot connected squarely with Chad's groin, the force lifting him several inches off the ground. Chad's eyes bulged. His mouth opened in a perfect, silent O of agony and surprise. The stream of urine cut off instantly. The energy drink can flew from his limp hand, clattering onto the stones. For a split second, he was airborne, a marionette whose strings had been violently cut. Then gravity reasserted itself. He crumpled, folding in on himself like a deflating parade balloon, and landed with a wet, undignified splash right in the puddle he had just created. The air rushed out of his lungs in a high-pitched, wheezing squeal that sounded nothing like his earlier bravado. "Oh, my God!" he shrieked, his voice several octaves higher than before. He curled into a tight fetal position, clutching his wounded pride and a far more tender part of his anatomy, his body racked with waves of pure, unadulterated pain. And Sergeant Hayes? His leg had already retracted. Before Chad had even hit the ground, Ethan's foot was back in its original position. His posture was once again ramrod straight, his M14 perfectly placed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He took his 21st step. Click. He turned to face east. He began his 21-second count. To anyone arriving at that precise moment, nothing would have seemed amiss, save for the pathetic, groaning figure writhing on the ground. The guard was a statue. The guard hadn't moved. The guard was simply performing his sacred duty. The retired Marine colonel allowed a grim, almost imperceptible smile to touch his lips. He let out a slow, controlled breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It was perfect. A textbook application of proportional force. No anger. No malice. Just a swift, clean, and utterly final correction. Chad Miller had wanted to make his mark on a piece of American history. In the end, history, in the form of a size 12 regulation dress shoe, had made its mark on him. The high-pitched whimpers from the marble plaza finally broke the spell of stunned silence. Within minutes, 2 military police officers appeared, their pace professional and unhurried. They had likely been alerted seconds into the incident, but had allowed the sentinel on duty the latitude to handle the situation. They took in the scene, the weeping man on the ground, the dark, spreading stain on the marble, and the utterly impassive tomb guard continuing his patrol as if nothing had happened. "Evening, sir," the senior MP said to Chad, his voice devoid of sympathy. "Looks like you've taken a bit of a spill." He kicked me." Chad gasped, pointing a trembling finger at Ethan, who was now marching north. Right in the, "Oh, God," another wave of pain silenced him. The MP glanced at his partner, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "Did he now?" he said, turning his gaze to Sergeant Hayes. "I don't see any break in formation, do you, Corporal?" "No, Sergeant," the younger MP replied, his face a perfect mask of professional neutrality, though his eyes held a glint of approval. "Just looks like standard guard duty to me. Impeccable form, actually." He pulled out a notepad. "I do, however, see evidence of public indecency, defacing government property, and assaulting a federal service member." As the list of charges grew, the color drained from Chad's face. At that moment, the retired Marine colonel stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate respect. "Officers," he said, his voice a low baritone that carried authority. "If you require a witness statement, I can provide one. I observed this individual deliberately and profanely desecrate this hallowed ground and the uniform of this soldier. The sentinel, I might add, maintained his military bearing with a level of discipline that was nothing short of extraordinary." "Maintained his bearing through the whole thing, you say?" the senior MP asked, glancing at the colonel's confident posture. The silent endorsement from a fellow senior military man was all the confirmation he needed. He turned back to Chad. "All right, son. Let's get you up. You have a lot to answer for." As they hauled the wobbling, groaning Chad to his feet, the younger MP leaned in. "Word of advice," he murmured, for Chad's ears only. "These men aren't statues. They're warriors from the best infantry unit in the army. They volunteer for this. They choose to stand here, in perfect silence, to honor men who can no longer speak for themselves. You didn't just disrespect a soldier. You disrespected every single sacrifice this place represents. Remember that. The colonel watched them lead Chad away, then turned his gaze back to Sergeant Hayes, who completed his tour and was relieved by the next guard with flawless, clockwork precision. The crowd, which had remained, broke into a soft, respectful applause, not for the violence, but for the restoration of order and honor. The uniform these sentinels wear is more than cloth and brass. It is a living commitment. It is the nation's promise that the sacrifices made by the unknown will never be forgotten. Sergeant Hayes's response wasn't born of anger. It was a calculated, necessary lesson. A reminder that behind the ceremony stands a warrior, and behind the silence stands an unbreakable code of honor. Some lines are not meant to be crossed. Some ground is, and must always remain, sacred. What do you think? Was the Sentinel's response justified, or should he have waited for the police? Where is the line between ceremonial duty and defending the honor that uniform represents? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We ask that you please comment with respect for the soldiers and the sacred ground discussed in this story. And if you believe that honor is worth defending, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of the silent warriors who stand guard over our nation's soul.